this is just for your information. So today I have Dr. Kaushik Krishnan as a speaker for the day, who is the Chief Economist at CMIE, that is Center for Monitoring Indian Economy. He primarily deals in to deliver record level data from consumer pyramids household survey to researchers, and this is again done through consumer pyramids DX. Dr. Krishnan also holds a BA and LLB from WB National University of Juridical Sciences and also an LLM and PhD in economics from University of Berkeley. So today during the talk, Dr. Krishnan is going to cover Introduction to Consumer Pyramids Household Survey, data sets available in Consumer Pyramids DX and how to access the data sets, again how to use the data also. So without taking any more time, I would like to invite Dr. Kaushik Krishnan to take over the platform and begin the session. Thank you so much. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you so much for having us. We are really delighted that you are now subscribers to the data. We have seen what so many other universities and researchers have been able to do, and we look forward to working closely with you to make the data as useful for you and for your research as we can. I'd like to do a quick presentation. It will not even take up the entire hour. This is on purpose. I'd like to leave more time for questions rather than less, because we really want to clarify the doubts that you have, the questions that you have, the kind of research that you want to do will dictate those questions. My presentation should not take more than about 30 minutes or so. If you have any questions while I'm actually doing the presentation, please don't hesitate to stop me. The presentation is only there as a medium for us to communicate to you what is in Consumer Pyramids Household Survey. But as I said, our most important reason for being here is to be able to answer your questions. So please ask us any questions that you would like, whether it's on how we conduct the survey, on how we define a particular indicator, on how to use the data, etc. We will try to answer as many of them as we can. Rajiv, can you confirm whether you are able to see my screen?
Not yet, Kaushik.
Not. Just a minute. I think I'm just having a little bit of trouble sharing my screen. That's on my end. Give me 1 minute. Rajiv, can you see it now?
Yes, it's loading. Yeah, can see it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Rajiv. And again, thank you to everybody that's attending for coming to this session. We will be happy to do more of these sessions with you, with your colleagues, with your students, with your faculty members, as you would like. We are really at your service. This is intended to be an introduction to Consumer Pyramids Household Survey. Some of you may have already seen a version of this talk, because we do give this talk occasionally, even publicly. Please, again, if this is not helping in terms of your understanding of CPHS, please just tell us what you would like to know. I have a feeling, though, that for many of you, this may be slightly new. So I will go through it, and I'll go through it quite quickly so that then we can get to your questions. So the first slide.
Sorry, Kaushik. Sorry for interruption. Can you make it full screen?
Yeah, I was having some trouble. The second it goes into full screen, I think the
okay, no worries.
Video cuts off. Sorry about that. Is it able? Are you able to see it, or is it too small?
Yeah, no, it's visible. That's
okay. Sorry about that, Rajiv. The first slide I'd like to show you is, an intentionally provocative slide. It is not on anything to do with the data, but on one very important metric for us, since researchers and academics and scholars are such a big part and that is just the number of papers that have already been written using consumer pyramids. This presentation was made not too long ago, just a few weeks ago, but it is already out of date because of the pace at which new papers are being written. There are now 55 papers that have been written using consumer pyramids household survey. We made the record level data available in 2017. So as you can see, in that first year itself, there was one paper written. Then in 2018, three more papers were written. In 2019, seven more papers were written. In 2020, 16 more papers were written. So last year was a very productive year when it comes to CPHS. This year, 2021, we already have over 25 papers written. So in this year alone, I think we have done not just more papers than all of 2020, even though the year still has some time to go, but even more than 2020 and 2019 combined, and almost as much as the entire 2017 to 2020 as of today. And there are more papers coming out literally every single day. We currently see somewhere in the order of about one paper being put out every week. I'll give you an example of some of these papers. This slide, of course, has a lot of names. This is just to indicate to you the breadth of work that's being done. There is work being done on public finance, there's work being done on health, on labor, on social protection, on political economy, on household consumption, household finance, macro, you name it, there are papers today being written, and they are being written by people across the world. Uh, there are many people at Indian institutions. Equally, there are people at New York University, at the University of Chicago, at Harvard University. Truly, a global scholarship that's being built on CPHS today. We are really delighted to see this, and we hope that you are too. We hope that you see this as a sign of how powerful the data set can be and how it is a really good vehicle when it comes to studying the well-being of households in India. But that hardly answers the question of what is the survey. The survey is just India's largest regular household survey. It is the easiest way for us to describe it to you. Whether you compare it to private surveys or public surveys run by the government of India, there is no regular household survey that reaches our sample size. Today, we are in fact even larger than 178,005 households because we expanded our sample again in the wave that just finished. We are not yet at 179,000, but we're at about 178,000 plus households. What sets CPHS apart just from this large sample size, though, is the fact that the survey, unlike any other household survey in India, except perhaps the IHDS survey, which happens once every 5 years, this is the world's largest household panel survey, not just India's, but the world's. So we interview every one of these 178,000 households 3 times a year. So you have 3 rounds of data collection being done every single year. We've now already completed 23 waves. In fact, we just completed the 23rd wave. All 23 waves of data are available to you as subscribers. So the data collection. Hi, is there a question? Okay. The data collection started in 2014. We started on the 1st of January of 2014. We did the first wave from Jan 1 to April 31. The second wave from May 1 to August 31, and the third wave from September 1 till December 31. So that is 3 rounds of data collection in the first year. We have kept up with that cadence and we've delivered that every single year from 2014 until today. So by the end of this year, we will have 24 waves of data that would have been collected and made available to our subscribers. I'll pause here for a second because I want to ask a somewhat provocative question. If anybody in the audience would like to answer it. We collect the data over 4 months. Okay, so we did it, for example, from May 1st to August 31st, and we are doing it right now from September 1st to December 31st. Can any of you guess when the May 1st to August 31st data was made available to our subscribers? So keep in mind, the survey ended on 31st August. And when do you think that you, as subscribers to the data set, got access to that micro level, record level micro data?
First of September?
Yes, absolutely. 1st of September, you're right. So, unlike other surveys, it's very exciting to see the survey happen, but quite sad as a researcher to see that the data does not get released. In this case, we make sure that never happens. The system is fully automated. The day the survey ends, by the next day, the data is ready for you to download onto your machines. We cannot make it any faster than this, and we will never make it any slower than this. So in maybe a few cases, you may have to wait one day. It might become 2nd of September, but that is quite rare. Almost always we deliver the data one day after the data collection is complete, which guarantees that you have the data as soon as possible. And by the way, I'll point out, nobody at CMIE, not me, not the CEO of the company, not Rajiv, not my colleague Preeta, who's also here, nobody at CMIE or any of our subscribers anywhere in the world has privileged access to our data. Everybody gets the data at the same time, and that is the day after the survey. And we really understand that for you as researchers, you don't want to be in a position where somebody is getting data differently from you, etc. So everybody gets data at the same time, and we do everything we can to make sure that the gap between data collection and data delivery is as small as possible. So thanks for that answer. You are bang on. It takes one day for the data to be delivered to you. I'll move to one additional point about the survey. I've told you about its sample size, it's quite large. I've told you about the time series, which is also very large. Now I'll tell you about the coverage across India. This slide as well, we discovered and reported just yesterday, in fact, at one of our webinars. This has also now increased. So it used to be the case that the survey covered the landmass of India that corresponds to 98.5% of India's population. What I mean by that is that there were certain portions of India that we were not yet surveying. Most of them are regions that are currently inaccessible. For example, I mean the Andaman and Nicobar Islands and Lakshadweep Islands. They are very hard for us to get to conduct a survey. The northeastern states, not all of them, but some of them, for example, Manipur, Mizoram, Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, we are not yet there. We are not in Ladakh because it is not accessible throughout the year. These areas are inaccessible. We are trying as much as possible to gain access, but as you can all imagine, these are also somewhat sensitive areas, quite far-flung and remote areas, where we have not yet managed to make progress. There were a few areas inside India where we needed to expand our sample to expand our coverage further. They were mostly in Rajasthan, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh, and Puducherry. And we completed a sample expansion exercise, which means that we have now actually reached all of those interior locations in these states. With that exercise complete, it's not 98.5% of India's population. We now cover 99% of India's population in terms of landmass. Only 1% of India has missed out, which is mostly, if not entirely, these somewhat inaccessible regions. We will continue to try to get into those regions, but with those exceptions, we are truly across the length and breadth of India today. And finally, we have over 600 indicators or data points that we capture every single round of the survey. On every household, on every member inside that household, we capture this information. Nobody is missed out. Nobody is rotated in. Give you the entire sample of data. We capture 635 indicators to be precise. And that's really going to be the bulk of the remainder of my talk, is going to be to tell you about what data we capture, to give you ideas for your research, to help you think about how this might be useful or applicable to you. But before I go there, quick break and check in with all of you. Do any of you have any questions having come this far? Please feel free to ask. For example, I'm not going into tremendous detail in this talk on survey design, sampling, etc. But if there are questions, I can answer them immediately and also point you to where you can get these answers from our documentation. So I'll pause here.
Yes, yeah, please go ahead, Sunaina, please. Thanks. Hi, Kaushik. Kaushik, yes, that is what my question is. What is the level of representation? So the data that you're saying, it's huge number of observations. 1,78,000 households is no joke. But one thing is, where can I find the sampling design and a documentation, something of that sort. And also I wanted to know, like, since you say that you release the data the very second day when it's over, how do you take care of households? Supposedly, if you find some kind of mistakes, you kind of update your data sets after it's released, or do you check the data the same very day and any correction is made within the time frame of 3 months?
Hi, Sunena. Thank you.
Hi.
Those are both really great questions. Uh, they're also somewhat involved questions, so I might take a little bit of time to answer them, but hopefully I'll be able to give you a complete answer. And in case you have more questions, I'll be happy to answer them right now, but I'll also point you to where you might be able to find some of those answers in our documentation as well.
Sure, thanks. Yeah.
Okay, great. Everything I'm saying to you, by the way, is from the documentation. So there is nothing that we at CMI know in any privileged capacity. We only know what's in the documentation. Of course, our job is also to prepare the documentation, right? So we are working on making more documentation available to fill in all gaps in documentation. But both of these questions can easily be answered from our documentation. Let me talk first about survey design and sampling, and what is the level of representativity that you can expect from CPHS. So here's what we do. We know that India is divided into states, and we also know that the states are divided into districts. And according to the 2011 census, there were 640 districts in the country.
Right.
Now, we do something quite similar to what the NSS does. If you're familiar with the NSS data,
Okay, I got it. Yeah.
divide India into regions, just like NSS.
Yeah.
We have a slightly different classification. What we do is we choose neighboring districts that primarily share similar agroclimatic conditions. And usually it's about 4 to 5 districts that comprise a region. So
Okay.
the 640 districts turn into 110 of our regions. Okay.
Okay.
Now,
Those
for
districts also share borders. I'm sorry to interrupt.
absolutely,
Just
absolutely, yes,
okay.
yes,
Got it.
yes.
Okay.
They have to share contiguous borders.
Okay.
Huh. Now, for each of these regions, we have 5 substrata. One is a rural stratum, and then there are 4 different urban substrata. The reason for that has to do with something that happened in the 2011 census. So before I dive into that, let me just tell you about the rural stratum and how we do sampling in the rural stratum. So in every one of these regions, the rural stratum is simply the list of all villages in that region according to the 2011 census. Now, this is known information. So we know the entire population of all villages. So that's the sample that we can select from. Then the villages that end up in our sample are randomly selected from that list. And there's a minimum of 30 villages that we select from each region to constitute the rural sample. And the important point in the selection process is that each of these villages is chosen completely at random. So we know the
Right.
universe of villages and we just
I
choose a minimum of 30 at random.
got it.
So that's the rural sample. Now, we could have made things fairly straightforward for us and just had one urban sample. The reason we substratify urban into 4 is because in the 2011 census, there was a huge proliferation of, what you might call census towns. They are towns according to census, but not towns even according to administrative definitions. So they won't even be municipalities. And they certainly will not be towns according to your or my understanding of what a town is. So what we do is we have the complete population of all these towns from the census. By the way, when I say town, I mean cities as well. It's just that census has only 2 things, villages and towns. So we have all these towns. What we do with the towns is we break them up into 4 categories. Towns that have a population of approximately 1 million people or more as of 2011, which is when the last census was conducted, those towns are called very large towns. Then at the other end of the spectrum, towns that had a population of 100,000 people or less, those we call small towns. And we have medium towns and large towns in between. So there are 4 town size strata: small, medium, large, and very large. And we pick towns from every region to ensure that we have at least one small town, one medium town, one large town, and very large town from each region. So the reason we do that, is fairly obvious, right? Once I say it this way, what we want to avoid when you do simple random selection is because there's such a proliferation of these small towns, unless you stratify on town size, the likelihood that you'll actually select at random a large and economically important city, like for example, a Delhi or a Chennai or a Mumbai, is actually quite small. So to make it actually useful for researchers, we stratify on town size. And that ensures that we have at least one town from each of those town size classes. Now, again, this is at least. So in many cases, you'll see that we have more than one small town, more than one medium town. In a handful of cases, you'll see more than one large town. Very rarely will you see more than one very large town in the same region, but it does happen. So for example, for the region that Mumbai is in, Mumbai and Thane, which are both separate very large towns, are both sampled into the survey. So that's how we do the town selection. So are you with me so far?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so it's going to get a bit more confusing because it's so the short pithy answer is we do multi-stage stratified random sampling, but that doesn't tell you much. So I'm just explaining to you what the stages are, what the stratification is, and what the actual random sampling protocol is.
That perfectly works. That perfectly works. I'll actually see the documentation if it's already written, but you have already told me that you are, also catering to districts, and that is where your last level really happens. So that is quite a lot of information that I needed.
Correct. One caveat though, we give you district identifiers in the data. You also know whether it's from the rural part of the district or from very large, medium or small towns. However, our sampling unit is actually that region, which is the collection of districts, right? So even though we give you the district identifier in the data, our feeling is that the data is representative down to the level of the region, which is that collection of districts.
Okay, so that means 110 odd regions that you have, right? From 640 districts.
Exactly. And then
I got. But you give us district, that was my next question. You give us district identifiers.
We give you district identifiers.
Okay, got it.
And if you wanted a rough kind of rule of thumb for how much sample you'll have in a district, you can expect to have about 300 households per district.
I see. Got it.
So does that answer your first question broadly?
Yeah, it does. Absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. And by the way, so our website is here right on the bottom, consumerpyramidsdx.cmi.com. If you go to our website, and I'll show you as soon as I get through this deck, so that you can see how to access our documentation. Along with our documentation, there is usually one kind of YouTube video for every document where I and Mahesh Vyas, who's the CEO of the company, walk you through the documentation, and then we also answer questions live. So these are webinars that we've done in the past. Often people find that very useful. So we will send you links to those as well, though you can find them on our website. And we plan to keep refreshing people on this. So every so often, when we're not presenting some new documentation, we will go back to some earlier documentation and answer questions again. But that's not the only way you can get in touch with us, by the way. So you can always reach out to us directly, and we will be more than happy to answer questions. Our assurance is that we will turn around and answer for you within one business day. Now, in some cases, you might ask us a really complicated question, in which case our one business day response might be, we need a little bit more time, but we'll certainly get back to you and we'll tell you how much time we need to answer a question. Okay. Perfect. Now, having said all this, I'm sorry, I forgot your second question. Can you remind me, please?
It was that suppose there's when do you find if there's an error in some kind of household reporting, if you feel there's an error, like I've also done some surveys, but when we do primary surveys, we do, a handful, just 200, 300, 800 households. And we check the data, and it was not automated at that point when I'm telling you about, but we would find sometimes, okay, this doesn't make sense because we have multiple checks within the survey questionnaire to make sure that the answer is right. Now, if you find that in your household, do you go back the same, does how your data is checked within the 3-month time frame in which you're collecting? Or if supposedly I write back to you, how does the correction happen? Do you check the data, or do you wait for people to use, and if there's a complaint, and then you kind of tell it to the public that yes, there is an error, or you go back to the household and correct the data? If there's a data error, do you make corrections to it, or what do we need to do in that particular case?
Samjha, got it. Thanks.
Yeah.
So, okay. here again, it's a bit of an involved answer, but it's a great question. So I'll take a couple of minutes to answer it. The kind of the way that NSS used to do this when they would conduct large surveys is they would conduct the survey, and then much after the survey was conducted, all the enumeration sheets would be bundled up at the district level. Then they would get bundled up at the region level. There'd be some QA in each of those steps, some quality assurance, some validation. Then they would eventually make the way to some head office, and then there'd be more checks done there. And what that did was it introduced a fair amount of delay when it came to validation. And it didn't necessarily help validation too much, because often the best validation is the validation that happens nearly in real time. So the way we try and solve this problem is as follows. Every single day, households are being interviewed. Every day. Okay, so there's no breaks in the survey. We don't break for weekends. We don't break for public holidays. We didn't break for COVID. We don't break for anything. The only day we didn't survey in India was the day of the Janata curfew, which was last year. And we were taken as much by surprise, I think, as the rest of the country. That was the one day we didn't have field operations. Every other day we've been in the field. On average, we survey something in the order of about 1,000 households in the field every day. That's done by a team of about 200 interviewers. On days where it's particularly heavy, in field, there might even be more than 200 interviewers, because our total interviewer strength is about 300. On top of the interviewers, there are 100 people whose job is to do supervision. And the supervision happens in real time. So the way it works is the interviewer has an app on their phone. The phone logs their GPS as well as a lot of paradata on the survey as the survey is being conducted. As soon as the interview is done with the household and that interviewer presses submit, the data gets beamed back to our head office. There can be a small delay if the interviewer is in some really far-flung part of the country where there isn't data, but usually we're talking minutes and not even hours.
I got it. So I know this this system also of using mobile phones, and you're entering your survey answers in that, and it gets updated that very moment on either Stata or whatever Excel sheet, whatever mode you want your data to get updated on, right?
Oh, even better than that. Yeah. So we don't do any Excel sheets because we don't want anybody to tamper with the record. So what ends up happening is the data gets collected, it gets analyzed immediately. Okay. And so there are 4 broad kinds of analysis that we do. One is very simple. It's just a GPS check. Did the interviewer actually show up to that household? And it's a bunch of, let me say, like really first level paradata checks. Did the interviewer complete the interview in 1 minute? Okay, something's really wrong, right? Like that kind of stuff. The next level of checks, all of this is performed automatically, by the way. The next level of checks is for internal consistency within the record. So, for example, we have a labor module. We also have an income module, right? So in the labor module, if somebody says that they're employed, but in the income module, that same person says that their wage income was 0, then it raises a flag. It's not necessarily wrong, but for example, in COVID, it happened a lot. So in COVID, there were many people who were genuinely employed, genuinely working, but didn't earn a wage because their employer was credit constrained. But there's a series of flags like this that just check for internal consistency issues. The third thing we do is, because it's a panel, we've been collecting data on this household often for quite a few waves already. So the third kind of check is a time series check, which means suppose the household, this particular household, has a trend of saying that their monthly expenses for potatoes is about 100 rupees a month. And suddenly for last month, they say that they had, I don't know, 1,200 rupees of potato expenses. Again, a flag goes up. It's not immediately marked as wrong, because usually when you see a spike in expenses like this, assuming it's a legitimate spike, it's because of a celebration like a wedding or a festival or something like that. And the fourth kind of check is neighborhood effects. Because the sample is so large and because we have so many surveys being conducted every single day, we know how a particular household is trending relative to its average for that neighborhood in just the last few days, right? So if everybody else in this neighborhood is saying, we all sold our livestock, so we don't have any livestock, and one household is saying, I bought 5 cattle, right? Then you know that maybe something went wrong. So all of these things are pre-processed by our systems, turned into flags, and the flags are given to our supervisors. So there's an app for our enumerators and there's an app for our supervisors. The supervisor, without these flags, it's very hard to spot check every single interview record.
So with these flags, it makes it really fast for them. So they can quickly see, acha, okay, here are the problems. Enumerators are allowed to make notes, by the way. So usually when they see something that's off trend, they themselves will make a note in the system so the supervisor can check. In case the supervisor isn't satisfied, the aim of the system is that the supervisor is able to call the enumerator while not only is that enumerator still in the field, they're still in the same neighborhood. So, it's one phone call and he says, acha, yahan pe kya ho gaya? Why was potato expenses so high? The enumerator says, nay, there was a shadi. And he says, okay, done, right? And if he's not satisfied with the explanation he gets, he's able to very quickly say, no, this is not good enough. In which case, one of two things can happen. The supervisor can either trigger what's called a recheck, which just means a couple of records from the interview have to be recaptured by the same enumerator. The other, in very egregious cases, which happens rarely, is a redo, which means everything is garbage.
I see. Got it.
Entire record is scrubbed from the data. A brand new interviewer is assigned that household, and that person will now go and collect the data.
So this happens within the 3 months before you release the data to us, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Not just in the 3 months.
It's the same day or day or two.
In the case of a redo, it's allowed to take as much as 1 week, but it should never be longer than a week.
I see. Got it.
These broadly are the big data quality checks. Now, with every kind of indicator, the data quality check varies a little bit. So just this week, we put out our documentation on age and gender. And for age and gender, we have some very age and gender specific checks. What I mean is, suppose an interviewer shows up, gender should be time and varying, right? You shouldn't expect gender to change very often in the ground for a particular member. So if an interviewer shows up and he asks, for this member's gender, and by the way, all questions are compulsory to be collected every time. And suddenly it seems that this member is not male, but female. It's not easy for the interviewer to enter female. To do it, the interviewer has to first change this person's relationship with the head of the household. That can then trigger a gender change, and then they can make the gender change. So it's two-step, and it can only be done once a supervisor approves it. So we have, for each indicator, there are different QA processes that are at work in the backend. Gender, for example, there's a kind of similar thing that happens, which is depending on the last collected age of that person, there will be some band of tolerance, right? Because people often don't know their age terribly well. So if somebody says 28 this time and says 27 next time, that's tolerable. But if somebody says 28 this time and says 45 next time, that's not tolerable. So we have different systems for different indicators. You asked one last kind of sub-question to your question, which I'll just take the liberty of answering if you don't mind. Do we do any post-hoc data correction? The answer is no. So that becomes problematic in its own, right? Because then you as researchers don't have any stable data. The producer of the data is willy-nilly changing records in the past based on data collected in the future. So we don't do that. Once data is collected and released to subscribers, that data never gets touched. If we find something that's wrong, we fix it in a subsequent way. Occasionally, those kinds of things may happen, with 178,000 households, maybe, but we will never, ever touch prior data.
Okay. That answers all. Thank you so much for such a detailed answers. Thank you.
No problem at all. Please keep the questions coming. They are much more interesting than this presentation. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you for such a wonderful, easy to understand presentation. I mean, you guys are really doing very important stuff. I mean, there was actually a debate in the last couple of days between your CEO and Yogendra Yadav about your data collection on employment and so on. It was in the print.
Yes.
It was fascinating to read, and you're clearly doing very important work. Just one question. I mean, I've gone through all the, the data that you have, and I mean, so is there any plan at some point to collect sort of data on sort of political participation related variables like voting, or, would you be voting in the election, or is there a party you will vote for and things like that? Or is this like going to be purely sort of restricted to economic variables?
That's a great question. I'm sorry, I can't see your name because I'm not able to see the Microsoft Teams screen.
Oh, I'm Shubhashish.
Hi, Shubhashish. This is a wonderful question. I wish you could see the smile on my face.
Hello, Mr. Krishnan.
Yes.
Let me just stop you 1 minute because my question is also related to Shubhashish's question. Is that just tagging to his question that is there any plan? I asked this question on a previous presentation as well. Is there any plan to expand your surveys to political or opinion about opinion of people on different current issues? For example, the way the General Social Survey in US does collect people's opinion about different issues. So it's tagging to Shubhashish's question.
Okay, wonderful. Both of these are really great questions. Let me talk about politics first and then opinions second. We are very interested in studying politics. We have not yet put anything out there, but Shubhashish, if this is something that you are particularly interested on, what we would love to do is perhaps we can schedule a session where you can talk with us, and I'll bring Mahesh into the conversation as well. And we can talk with you about this because, as I'm sure you know, this is also something we want to make sure we do right. And we have been thinking about this a lot. There is a lot of internal work that's been done on this, but none of it is stuff that I can publicly discuss because none of it has managed to make its way into the baseline survey yet. But we are very, very interested. And if this is something that you're particularly keen on, we'll try to make sure that we can schedule even a half an hour or a 1 hour discussion with Mahesh on this. I'll say that quickly on politics. And if you don't mind, I'll answer the question on opinions and then come back to the both of you for any comments. On opinions, we don't currently capture opinions on anything other than really economic opinions. Questions such as, do you feel your family income will go down or up in the coming year? What do you think about India's business conditions? What do you think about whether it's a good time to buy durables, etc.? However, on social-based opinions, we have done in the past a very large multi-wave survey with the Lok Foundation. And the data from that data collection, which we did for the Lok Foundation, that was piggybacked on top of CPHS. So we are very happy, by the way, and I should mention this to all of you, we're very, very happy to partner to add additional questions on top of the baseline. It can be a sometimes expensive and costly process, but it's something we are very, very happy to do. We've been doing it with the World Bank for over a year. They have been working with us to have additional questions on top of the baseline asked for them. We are continuing to do that work with the bank and extending this engagement for another year. So we're very happy with that. We worked with others on this as well. The problem here is whenever we work with a partner to do data collection, that data is really theirs. And so unless they clear it and say that we can talk about it publicly, we're not at liberty to talk about what additional data collection we've done for them. In the case of the Lok Foundation, however, we did, here we have the clearance to be able to tell you. So we did over multiple waves, a series of questions about attitudes, social behaviors, opinions, especially about religion, about caste, about gender, about issues like violence, etc. That data is not a part of CPHS because that data collection was funded by the Lok Foundation. But we are working with the Lok Foundation to make that data available for free. And the nice thing about it is because it was collected piggybacking on CPHS, the household identifiers and the member identifiers are the same. So that's work in progress at the moment. We are working to make that data available. As soon as it is, we will be the first people to tell you, and you can link all of that data back into the data we collect in CPHS.
Thank you so much.
So that's wonderful. And so how can we have this discussion? Should I write to you and then we can?
That would be perfect, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So I'll just I can just find your Kaushik, right?
I'm Kaushik. My
So
email address is
email I can find. Okay, sorry, say it again.
K as in Kaushik, just the first name, first initial, and then Krishnan. So K Krishnan at CMIE.com.
Okay. Thank you.
Not a problem.
I think you have another person's hand up.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Krishnan. I have a question. I have gone through the survey documents that have been uploaded in the CMI website, and there are certain changes that have happened over the years to the survey questionnaires, and you have added some of the, for example, questions related to time use that have been added recently, I think in 2019. So are the questions related to time use, or if any questions that I've added later in the later years, are responses related to that available in the earlier data sets, as in, for example, if time use related or time use related indicators are data available for 2014 and 2015, or they are not available at all?
Okay, another great question. I'm sorry I'm going to disappoint you with my answer, though. It's only available from 2019, but the reason is because it was only captured from 2019. And the reason for that is actually quite important in explaining to all of you, since you're now our user base, is often where we expand the survey, and this is why I had suggested that Shubhashish write to us, where we expand the survey is dictated very heavily by our subscribers. Unlike other surveys, we are not funded by grant funding. We are not funded by the government. And this is not by accident, right? We don't necessarily want any one large set of funders to control what data gets collected. When the funder changes their mind, that data stops getting collected. We want to make this a much more democratic process. And so the way in which we often move into new areas is on the basis of user feedback. So time use came directly as a consequence of a set of interactions that Mahesh had with some users. Similarly, we added a migration module last year that is entirely due to user demand saying that they needed to know more about migration due to the pandemic. So unfortunately, in cases like that, we can't go back in time and collect that data, and it's also quite difficult to do retrospective data collection. So we add those questions going forward, but which questions are added are really determined on the basis of user feedback. So we'll be very, very happy and very keen to engage with you even individually to understand what your areas of interest are, where you would like to see the survey expand. I'll say this right up front. Of course, we can't expand in all directions because the survey instrument is long and we need to be careful to minimize respondent fatigue. But we try to expand in areas that benefit as many users as we can. That being said, when we do such an expansion, you can be guaranteed that the expansion will last into time forever. So what I mean is, when we start time use, we intended to start time use not as a one-off exercise, but as a part of the survey forever going forward. When we started migration, that was the same idea. So that makes the decision of which topics we choose all the more costly, because it has a long-term implication on the quality of the survey. But all of these decisions are made using user feedback. So please let us know where you're interested in what. The only drawback to this is when we start time use in 2019, we simply aren't in a position to give you data from earlier waves because it was never collected.
Dr. Krishnan, I have another question, more of a request. If you could elaborate on various weights that you have specified for your data sets. I've gone through the weights document, but if it would be great if you could elaborate on different weights. There are weekly, monthly, yearly, and there are different weights there. So if you could elaborate on how to go about it and use them. And also I have read a few newspaper reports as to the population estimates that CMIE, CPHS data set estimates is quite different from NSSO and others. So how would you justify the difference, and so people can raise a questions related to whether if someone is doing a population level study, so if these estimates are different, so how would you justify that?
Okay, both of them are again excellent questions. Let me answer the second one first and then get to your first question on weights. Now, I want to be clear about which newspaper reports you're talking about, because that will also help me in how I respond to this. But my suspicion, my guess, is that the majority of the debate has been around CPHS's employment numbers as opposed to employment numbers coming from NSS and then later PLFS. Is that what you're referring to broadly?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about this. Okay. It needs to be unpacked carefully. Now, The NSS PLFS approach to capturing information on unemployment is fundamentally different from ours. And I want to stress this as much as I can. Our intention at CPHS is not to replicate another survey. It doesn't help you as researchers if there's no new signal in our survey and we are simply a replication of an existing survey. Our intention at CPHS is to be as innovative as possible and to give data that's meaningful. Okay, in the context of employment, what that means is our definition of employment is very markedly different from the definition of employment used in NSS surveys as well as in the PLFS surveys. In particular, what we require for somebody to qualify as employed is that they were employed for the better part of the day as on the day of the survey. Now, of course, the day of the survey might be a weekend. They might not be regularly working on that day. That's not our intention, and we make adjustments for that. But it is different from what PLFS and NSS both do, where they collect information more at a weekly recall period or a yearly recall period. Let's take just the weekly recall period because that's the closest to our definition. Our definition is basically a daily recall period. In the weekly recall period, let's take PLFS. PLFS will categorize you as, so to qualify as employed in PLFS, you have to have worked 1 hour in the last 7 days. That's it. Okay, 1 hour in the last 7 days. And even if you say, I worked 1 hour in the last 7 days, but I was unemployed for the remainder of the time and I was drastically, desperately looking for work, there is a priority assignment rule in PLFS that assigns you employment status regardless of that fact. Now, we don't think that that necessarily makes sense when you're measuring employment. If somebody's worked 1 hour in the last 7 days, we don't think that that counts as employed. But there's a reason it goes that way in PLFS and in the NSS surveys in the past, which is they don't have the luxury of going into the field as often as we do. We go into the field and visit every household in the survey 3 times a year. So we don't need long recall periods. And we simply ask the question, were you employed for the better part of the day? Now, this definitional difference is really the reason for the difference between NSS estimates or what NSS/PLFS estimates and CPHS estimates. You will not see this difference for men. It affects women primarily because in the PLFS world, if a woman says that, especially let's take rural India just for the purpose of an argument, if a woman says that she did some gainful work for even an hour in the week, she, did some work on the farm, maybe she milked some cows, she did something. She then qualifies as employed regardless of her self-assessed whether she was employed or not. Now, we just simply think that that's not the approach that we should follow. And so we follow a different approach. That approach leads to different estimates. We have no intention of running CPHS in a way that helps you recover NSS estimates, because in a case like this, we don't feel that that definition of employment is appropriate. And so that is the reason for the difference between the two estimates. That being said, I think the world is starting to see the value in our definition because it really talks about employment in a more economically significant way, we feel, and we find more and more people using our definition. That's broadly my answer to you on the difference between CPHS and NSS or PLFS. Now, there will be different differences depending on the area of comparison. The dominant area of discussion today happens to be the difference between CPHS numbers and those numbers coming from NSS or PLFS. But I will point out again, even if you look at the most recent PLFS data that's come out and the corresponding data from CPHS, aggregate unemployment, aggregate employment rate, they're roughly the same. For men, it's roughly the same. It's only for women where it differs, and that's because of this definitional difference that was taken with eyes wide open. So it is not that we mistakenly created this definition. We have very strong reasons for doing so, but I appreciate the question because it allows us to at least explain this difference in definitions and methodologies. And I hope that answers your question. Does it?
Yes. Thank you so much.
No problem. You asked another question, which is about weights. If I may suggest, on weights, there are 15 weights, like you said, and each set of weights helps researchers do something slightly different. The reason we have so many weights is almost entirely because of researcher demand. Researchers wanted different weights to be able to create different kinds of estimates. I will um, I will be doing a disservice to you if I answer this question purely verbally, because with 15 different weights, you need to see it on the screen a little bit and understand what each set of weights is doing. What I can recommend, if you don't mind, is we have an entire YouTube webinar just on weights. It's an hour long. It takes you through our weights documentation, but it gives you a slightly different flavor on the documentation. And that flavor is much more geared towards researchers. So we explain what the weight is as a fraction of one to another and how each weight differs. The weight, is just a population weight. So it's capital N over small n, where capital N is the estimated population size of the region of the sample unit, and small n is the sample size. Now, that is a very simplistic description. What makes the weight complicated are the subscripts that you attach to this weight. Right? So capital N can have a T subscript because population changes over time. Capital N can have a G subscript because it changes across geographies. Capital N can even have an I subscript because you might be interested in the population of households or the population of individuals or the population of individuals of working age, etc. So the reason we have 15 different weights is primarily to cater to different subscripts, if I can put it that way, in what you want from the population weight. Our YouTube video explains this, I think, fairly well. If you don't mind, can I punt on this question and ask you to take a look at that video, and we'll be happy to talk to you more in case you still have questions.
Yeah, sure. Can that link be shared, or is it available publicly? I can just Google.
It's on our website, but Rajiv, would you be able to pull it out and just send it across? I think Rajiv had to step out for another meeting. Not a problem. My colleague Preeta is also here. Preeta, would you just make a note of this so that we can send this back to the folks on this call?
Yes, sure.
Thank you so much. Okay. Great. Are there any other hands up? Okay. I'm reminded of my grad school days. You know that it's a great presentation when you've been on slide 8 for 1 hour, right? So I'm glad that there have been this many questions. And there's nothing in this presentation that's so sacrosanct that I have to say any of it. I'll be much happier to answer questions than to go through the remainder of the slideshow, but I'm equally happy to go through the slideshow. We will make sure that you have a PDF copy of it that's made available to you in any case, so that you can keep it and access it whenever you need. But please don't hold back on your questions, because we don't get this luxury when I'm doing, say, a larger webinar with hundreds of people attending. So really, I'll be happy to answer individual questions if there are more. If there aren't, I'll keep going on with this deck. Okay, looks like I can go on. So I'm sorry, was the session scheduled to go on until 4 or 4:30?
No, that's till 4:30.
4:30. Okay, great. So then I can keep going. So let me tell you a little bit about those indicators. So we say we have 635 indicators, but what do we really have in the data, right? I'll show you first the data that we have collected on people. So there's a sample of 178,000 households. Each of those households has individual members. And if you count up all those members, you get something like 900,000 live members. Now, there are some members that have come and gone. So in total, the survey has probably collected information about 1.3 million people. But currently in sample, it's about 900,000 people. On each of those people, we capture all of this information. So on identity, we have information on caste, on gender, on marital status, caste category, religion, relationship to the head of the household, etc. Importantly, we have information on migration, and we have information on something called state of origin, which I can explain more if anybody's interested. It's basically a proxy for something like ethnicity. When it comes to education, we know whether people are literate, we know what their maximum educational qualifications are, and we know their discipline of study. On financial inclusion, we know whether members have a life insurance account, a bank account, a Kisan credit card, a regular credit card, a health insurance account, mobile phone, demat account, etc. On employment, we just had a long discussion on employment, so I won't get into it in too much detail, but I will say that for those people that are employed, we have a lot of information, the kind of work that salaried, etc. So across the spectrum of formality, we know their place of work physically. Do they go and work in a mandi, in a laboratory, in a warehouse, etc.? We know the nature of occupation that they perform, very, very fine grained. So we have two occupation variables. One is very detailed. The other one is, maybe 10,000 feet up in the air. We know the industry that they work in. We know whether they're full-time or part-time, etc. We have three questions on health at the member level, which are very, very powerful. Is this member on regular medication? Is this member healthy? Is this member hospitalized? Now, this is really, really remarkable and quite powerful. In fact, the most recent paper that's listed on our website is a paper that looks at this indicator, is healthy, and basically tries to tell a story about differences in health outcomes pre-COVID, but geographically across India. So it's a very interesting paper. Please do check it out. Somebody had already asked a question on time use, so I assume that some of you know that we conduct a time use survey. Those of you that don't, we conduct a time use survey. As simple as that. So every member above the age of 12, we capture information on how they spend their time on a representative day in the last 7 days, and we give you that information, and we give it to you 3 times a year. All of this information is given to you 3 times a year for every single member. Let me pause here, because after showing you this, I'm going to move to the data that we collect at the level of the household. But this slide has a lot of information, so I would like to pause and answer any questions that you have on any of these indicators.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Please.
Yeah, hi. I can see like really commendable job on the rich like variables that you have. But while I've been working with other data sets, the one thing that I find like missing from all the data sets collected in India is the caste status of, say, if you're asking the caste status of the woman, it's generally taken as the caste status of like whatever is the caste of the husband. So have you considered, or do you do that you ask the women about what was her caste of her natal family, or you collect the caste information? So for the daughters is the same, but for the married women, do you consider collecting that information?
That's a good question. We definitely ask women what their caste is. Now, if women have self-ascribed their current caste identity as different from the caste identity they had earlier in life due to marriage or any other reason, we take the data as is. However, if somebody, we don't necessarily force that requirement. So in fact, if you look at our data, you will indeed find quite a few married couples where the caste and the religion don't line up. But it's entirely dependent on what the woman chooses to report. So in a particular place, if a woman does believe that her caste has changed because of a marriage, and she chooses to report the new caste, we don't ask her to report earlier data. See, our intention at CPHS is to capture data as on the date of survey and to never question what respondents say. We don't want to second guess them. We don't want to tell them, no, this is the wrong way of doing it. We want to make sure that we capture that appropriately. And at least in the case of caste, that's the implication that it has. All of that being said, like I said, you will certainly find in the data, and I know this because I've seen it myself, several instances of married couples where the caste and the religion will not line up.
Can I like follow that up?
Please.
So a lot of times the caste and religion will not line up, as in India every religion reports the caste. What I want, like what I would suggest as for a richer data set is that instead of course you cannot question the respondent about her identity, whatever she identifies with, but if you could just add that was this the same as your natal caste, that wouldn't be questioning her identity, but that would still give us additional information about things like the old caste-based practices. How much has that changed? Is there more marriages happening, and has the caste line blurred? So these kinds of information can be very useful if you just ask that additional question that is this the same as your natal caste, or have you changed your caste after marriage? Some sort of this thing. That's my suggestion.
That's a really wonderful suggestion, actually, and it's a good way of getting around this problem. Thank you. We'll seriously consider it. And like I said, every time we add questions, it's based on user feedback. We will 100% note this down. And please follow up with us in subsequent interactions. I hope this will not be the first and last one.
Yes.
And we really hope that we can add useful information to researchers. So thanks. We made a note of it, and
thank you.
We will see how feasible it is to do, etc., and certainly make sure to get back to you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll keep going then. I'll move on now to the data that we collect at the level of households. Now keep in mind, all of this is collected in the same survey, so all of it is linkable. Even though they are in different data sets, they share the same household ID and the same member ID if it's member level data. And so you can crosswalk across time, across data sets, any way you wish. At the household level, we collect this information that you see on your screens. Amenities is perhaps the most standard. We know the type of roof, the type of wall, but for both water access, as well as electricity access, we actually capture both of these variables on the intensive margin and not the extensive margin. So we know how many hours in a day a household gets access to water and how many days in a week a household gets access to electricity. So not just whether you actually have a water connection, but whether it works and how much water you get out of it. We know whether you have a toilet on the premises of the household. We know how much time you spend traveling. That's a good measure of the civic amenities that your household possesses. It's the way we ask it is we say how much time does it take you to travel a distance of 10 kilometers. On the borrowing side, for every household, we know both the source as well as the purpose of as many borrowings as exist in that household. Sources can be both formal and informal, so things like relatives, but also things like the bank. Purposes, again, are not limited by legal, quote unquote, legal purposes. You report as a household what the true purpose of that borrowing is. So just yesterday, I gave a public talk. I'm not sure if anyone from the audience here attended it, but I talked about one purpose in particular, which is when a household takes on a debt for the purpose of repaying another debt. And I showed that as of the most recent wave of data collection, this figure is the highest it's ever been in the history of CPHS. So today, 5.3% of households across the country have a debt only to repay another debt. And that's a really worrying thing, right? So this is debt on top of debt, right? It's interest on top of interest, which is really, really, really worrying. And the uptick happened in the second lockdown, not so much in the first. In the first lockdown, somehow households were able to get through it. When the second lockdown hit, they found their finances seriously stretched, which is when they started taking on more debt. And the only way to do it is to take on debt just to pay off some previous obligation. So this is quite a startling fact that we saw in the data. So we talked about it in a webinar that we did yesterday. Of course, we have many other purposes, and we encourage you to look through this data because it's really, really, really fascinating. I'll move quickly to the other things that you see on the screen. In terms of sentiment, I talked about this earlier. This is what somebody else had asked in terms of opinions. We capture sentiment mostly from an economic perspective. Sentiment is about family finances, about financial and business cycle conditions in India, and about intentions to purchase durable assets. On the savings side, just like with borrowings, we capture both formal as well as informal sources of savings and investment. So everything, or let me say traditional and modern. So everything from saving in gold and chit funds to saving in mutual funds and listed shares is captured. We also capture your intention to save. So a household tells us, I don't currently own any mutual funds, but I plan to buy mutual funds in the next 4 months. Both of those things are captured separately. Okay, so again, from a if one wants to understand how the recovery is progressing, looking into the future based on self-assessed household behavior is really, really useful, and it can be done using CPHS. Now, finally, we have a variety of assets where we do the same thing that we did with savings, which is, do you currently own any of these assets? Do you intend to purchase any of these assets? And we have it for a large number of assets. So about 4 months ago, I had given a webinar where I spoke about how the intention to purchase TVs, fridges, air conditioners, coolers, washing machines, etc., was really depressed, and it just hasn't recovered even after the first lockdown was over. Yesterday, at the same webinar that I presented, I showed a picture about rural India, and I looked at livestock or cattle ownership in rural India. And again, very much like the debt story that I told you earlier, we find that livestock ownership today is at the lowest level it's ever been in rural India. So pre-pandemic, the wave just before the pandemic, over 50% of households in rural India own some livestock. Today, 32% of households in rural India own some livestock. So there is some serious distress here. But these are just, our intention is not to do research. That's not what we do. We produce the survey, we answer your questions, we try and show people things that are interesting. Our intention is to enable your research to the extent that we can. So we thought we would put out some nice, interesting, provocative findings just to help you see the amount that's actually there in this data set. It's really a lot. Let me pause here again before going to the next screen. This is everything that we have on household. I'll tell you what's coming up. There's just two more screens. One is on income. The other is on consumption expenditure. So that's what I'm going to talk about next. But I'll pause in case there are any questions either on this slide or the slide that I'd shown you just before this. Okay, let's keep going. I'll move to income very quickly. Income is quite straightforward. We have a monthly time series of income. Okay, that's the really amazing thing. So even though we visit these households once every 4 months, which is 3 times a year, we fill in their monthly time series each time we visit them. There is no other survey in India that has a monthly time series of income or consumption expenditure. We give you both of them, and we break it down to you for you by member. Even within member, you know how much of that income comes from wages as opposed to interest, for example. We also give it to you at the household level, which aggregates all the member incomes, but adds on to that sources of income that only accrue at the level of the household. For example, if the government gives a transfer, usually that goes to the entire household. It's hard to say that Ramu got the transfer, but not Shamu, etc. So we have monthly member level income as well as household level income. I'll quickly show you consumption so that then I can hand it over for a last set of questions before we hit the 4:30 mark. On household consumption expenditure, we do the exact same thing. We have monthly household consumption expenditure. It's available for 153 different categories. That's way too many for me to show you on a screen. So instead, I'm showing you some top level categories. Each of these categories breaks down. So we have information on EMIs, on intoxicants, on power and fuel, recreation, food, bills and rent, appliances, restaurants, you name it. All of that information is present. As you can see on the top left-hand side of your screens, we also have some information on weekly household consumption. That is collected only for a subset of goods. Those are goods which are traditionally fast-moving goods like soap or biscuits or toothpaste or fruit and vegetables, etc. There we collect information at the weekly level as well, just to assess whether there's recall bias. If there is recall bias, in the micro data, we give you both the adjusted numbers where we adjust for recall bias, as well as the raw numbers as reported by the household, and we give you the weekly numbers. So in case you want to make your own adjustment for recall bias, you're at liberty to do so. That is CPHS in a nutshell. So I'll stop here. We have 10 minutes left for questions. I'm happy to answer more questions. Okay, I either put everybody to sleep or I've done such a great job that there are no questions remaining.
No, we are not sleeping. We thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. Yeah, the Lokesh Kumar has a question. Yeah.
Hi, it's not a question. Rather, is there any web? I mean, is there any blogspot or something where we can post our questions while we are working with data, while we incur some difficulty or a problem in understanding about the thing? How can we contact you? Is it through your email ID that you have prescribed, or is there any particular blogspot or a question module that is there in your website where we can post and get answers to that, because we can't be bothering you with every little thing. So is there anything such as a blogspot or a question answer module?
Lokesh, that is such a great question. Thank you for asking it, because I should have told you this and it slipped my mind. Let me show you exactly how you can answer or rather get your questions asked. Give me 1 second here. So our website is consumerpyramidsdx.cmi.com. All you have to do is you have to log in, and I'm going to log in. And unfortunately, I am very bad at remembering my password. So I will be right back. I'm going to find my phone where I've noted down my password. Okay, here I am. So once you log in, Lokesh, can you see that there's a new tab here, button here called support?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So if you click on this button support, there's a drop down called seek clarification.
Okay.
If you click on that, you can. So suppose your question is about whether some data is available. You click on this, you type in your message, attach whatever you need, and then you can send it to us immediately. Each of these queries is required to be answered by us within 1 business day. As I mentioned, sometimes very difficult queries might take us a little longer, but we'll let you know that it takes a bit longer. This is the best way to get in touch with us. You, of course, have our email addresses. However, email is a bit unreliable because there are so many things coming into our inboxes. This is something we are obligated to track. So if you post a question here, you will be guaranteed a response from us very soon.
Okay.
Thanks for asking that. And while I'm on the website, let me quickly show people how to download the data, because I'm sure some of you are wondering how to do that. This is our main page. The 4 modules I showed you are these 4 buttons here. People of India, Aspirational India, Income Pyramids, Consumption Pyramids. You can go to any of these and you'll see a data download option. All the data is available here. Just click and download whatever you want and it's yours. It's as simple as that. In the case of income, we capture income at the household level as well as the member level. So here you will see that you have to choose whether you want household or member level income, but otherwise it's the exact same process. So it's very, very straightforward to download the data, very easy to raise a support ticket. If you want to know where our documentation is, it's here in the how we do it section. All of our documentation is here. All of it is available. You can download all of it, read it anytime you wish and ask us questions and we'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, Dr. Krishnan.
Sure. Are there any other questions that I can answer? And I should say, we'll be very happy to do this for you again. I find that it's useful for us to do this at regular intervals. The first time it takes, a little bit of time for everybody to get used to the data. And then the second time people have lots of questions because they've downloaded the data and we've been playing with it. And they have very specific questions. So we will be happy to schedule another session in the near future. But I'm also happy to answer any other questions now if you have questions that you'd like answered. If there aren't any other questions, I'll be happy to turn it back to you. And thank you so much for being such a patient and interested audience. We got lots of questions, which was great. And just let us know when you'd like us to come back. And perhaps next time we'll come in person.
Kaushik, I've just added the link for the webinar for the weights in the chat box.
Rita, thank you so much. That's great. So yes, in the chat box, you can see the link to the weights document. I can't remember who asked the question on weights, but the answer should be in there.
we will be able to pass the information to the we'll go through the video again and we will pass the information to the professor who asked this question.
Wonderful.
We will be able to pass the information to the professor who asked this question, the link that you are sending it now.
Thank you, Dr. Madan. Yes, we'll make sure that we give you a copy of it so that we can pass it to all of them. In case you need anything else, we are at your service every day. Please
we will
to reach out.
Yeah, we will talk to our faculty members again.
Sure.
And according to their need, I think again certainly we will come back to you for more such orientations and training programs, or with some specific questions, if any. Yeah, we'll get back to you. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's our pleasure entirely. Thank you for hosting us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.